Get me out of here, Worm SI One Shot. By Professor Pedant. This is my take on what would happen if I ever self-inserted into Worm. Short and complete. March 15, 2011. The sound of gunfire and explosions, quickly followed by screams of agony, terror, and rage jerked me from a deep sleep. Panicking, I rolled out of bed and hugged the musty carpeted floor. For a few seconds I thought I was back in Baghdad, where sirens and gunfire would send me rushing for the nearest shelter. It was the carpet that cued me in that I was not in the green zone. The stained and worn rug smelled of old smoke and Lysol. The barracks I had stayed in during my visit to Iraq had sported bare linoleum floors that were surprisingly clean given the situation of the war-torn capital. I glanced around quickly, taking in my surroundings. It was a cheap motel room of the sort I had occasionally found myself in when traveling on the cheap. I saw 2 double beds with threadbare coverings, a chipped and scratched dresser with an old CRT TV on top, and a lamp with a water-stained shade. I wondered if the toilet would flush and if the shower would have any hot water. I did not remember checking into this flea bag. Last I recalled I went to bed in my house in Hartford, CT. Another explosion reclaimed my wandering attention. It was right outside my bathroom window. Something crashed through the glass and clattered in the plastic tub. I grabbed my khaki pants from where they lay flat on the second bed and pulled them on quickly. My pockets were full of their usual stuff. I picked up my shirt, which was hanging across the back of the room's single chair. My blue shirt, still buttoned, and grey undershirt were together. I pulled them on over my head as a single unit. Stepping into my shoes, I looked out the front window. People were coming out of other rooms, but I saw no fighting. Throwing open the door, I ran into the parking lot. The broken neon sign at the entrance took me a minute to decode. Brockton Bay Budget Inn. What the? Before I could answer myself, a shirtless man in tiger mask flew over the building. Immediately a smaller masked man in a black bodysuit festooned with weapons appeared in front of him and exploded. The onlookers in the parking lot started scattering, some running back in their rooms, some heading for vehicles, and some just fleeing into the poorly lit streets. Without realizing what I was doing, I felt a pressure in my body suddenly explode out of my hands and feet, and I was flying in an unsteady arc away from the 2 fictional killers fighting below me. How the hell was I in Worm? And how am I flying? I had read the web novel and found it darkly fascinating. This led me to read a lot of Worm fanfiction to find happier endings, eventually writing some of my own. Somehow, I seemed to be living a basic self-insert plot. While I had found some of those enjoyable enough to read, I had no desire whatsoever to inhabit one. Recognizing this was likely a dream or delusion, I still had to treat it as real. I had to get away from Brockton Bay. I knew enough of the plot and characters to be certain no matter what new powers I had, I did not want to share a city with Lung, Bakuda, Coyle, or Taylor. Worm was not a world that can be fixed, not without God-level powers and a willingness to face off against pan-dimensional monsters. While I could write about heroes bucking the odds and saving the day, I was personally not up to the task. I wanted out. I wanted to go home. But barring that, I wanted to be far from the cesspit by the bay. I put my back to the edge of the lights that I assumed indicated the Atlantic and flew west over the mountain and into the night. By dawn I was in Albany. I landed in large park with a pond and a lot of trees. It was still early enough that I had hopes no one had seen me. Hurrying to the edge of the grove, I found myself at the corner of Park and Delaware Avies. There was a large old middle school across the street. The electric sign said it was 7:06 a.m. on March 15, 2011. 2011. It was June 2021 when I went to sleep in Hartford. So, not only was I in a different world but a different time? I was also before Taylor's first night battle against Lung and after her trigger event. All the more reason to be settled somewhere away from Brockton Bay. Too many really horrible mass casualty events were scheduled to happen there in the next few months. Ah! I yelled as I caught my reflection in a parked minivan. Instead of a fat, bald, bearded 55-year-old man, I saw myself as I looked in college or just after. Slim, muscular with long, shaggy, light brown hair. My eyes were still blue, but once again I had a sharp, clean-shaven chin and noticeable cheekbones. My clothes hung on me like a tent. I was surprised my belt had enough notches to keep my pants up. I must have really been out of it not to notice all this in the motel when I dressed. I hurried away, heading for some tall buildings in the distance. I needed a library and a clothes store. After a half-hour's walking, I found the state capitol building, where I got a local map. The public library was only a few blocks away. The librarians were obviously wary of my oversized, but clean, clothes. I found the men's room and emptied my pockets to discover I had my phone, which was not connecting to any network. My wallet held my Connecticut driver's license, which was dated 2018 and showed my older face and birth date, making it useless to me. The wallet also held my university ID, a couple of credit cards which were also dated far into the future, and several other mostly useless bits and bobs. I also had my keys, car, house, office, etc. In my other pocket was $165 in cash and a packet of breath mints. I quickly downed one of the latter. Remembering there was something different about the money on Earth bet, I hoped the cash was similar enough that anyone other than a banker or government official would not notice. Without access to local currency to compare, I could not be sure. Effectively, I had no ID and little, if any, money. After rolling and tucking as well as I could to make my clothes look less tent-like, I sat down at a computer and started researching on the internet. The tech was different. I did not recognize the brand of computer or the operating system, though it was easy enough to figure out. The default search engine was Argus, but it seemed to work as well as Google or Bing. I looked for my name, James Houghton, and found 27 of them that had a net presence big enough for me to dig into. None of them were me at my original age or my current one. No record of me at the various universities at which I had studied or taught. No IMDb page. No Army records. No online stories or posts. Nothing that showed I had ever existed here. I looked up my wife and kids. Nothing for them either. I did not know whether to be pleased or not. My wife had left me some years before, and I was somewhat relieved I would not be tempted to try a reconciliation with her doppelganger in this world. Having established I did not exist in here, so could not just step back into my old life, I started thinking of what I was going to do. I could feel the gibbering madness in the back of my mind waiting for me to emotionally acknowledge my situation and start screaming, wailing, and hiding under the desk. I had learned long ago to distance myself from strong emotions when needed and function on a more rational level. This tendency to repress had been the core of the problems in my marriage. But it helped me in more dangerous situations. While I was not actively in combat, this was certainly a war zone. And I needed to find a path to safety, or as safe as I could be in this hell world. What can a person with many skills, but no certification or degree, do to make money? I had powers, though I had not explored them enough to really know what they were. That opened the possibilities unique to this world: hero, rouge, and villain. In most war isekais, the insert character usually hunts a few drug dealers to get their initial funds. I was not willing to do that, given any other choice. Nor was I interested in joining the Protectorate or any of the villain groups. Given my history, it was no surprise that my initial thought was to find something to do in academia. I had been working in and around universities for more than 30 years. Even my time with the Army was at the War College. It was my natural environment. The other past possibilities included finding work on a movie or TV set, but I lacked the union connections to be eligible for those jobs, or living off the grid at a Renaissance fair. I had no connections in that community either, and just appearing at a fair and expecting to be offered work and lodging was a bad bet even in my old world. Here I would half expect them to think I was a slaughterhouse wannabe looking for my next target. I decided to start with academia. There had to be researchers in this world that studied para-humans and their powers. Perhaps I could find work as a paid guinea pig. It was a way to make contacts and possible take classes towards a new degree. I knew alternate worlds was a known thing here, so I could also explain I had fallen through from an alternate Earth and that might make me more interesting to study while getting institutional help to establish a legal identity here. I am more trusting of academics than government authorities. But the risk was fairly low. If anyone tried to abuse or detain me, I can hopefully use my powers to get away and I would not be in much worse a situation than I currently am. I needed to do two things: find a researcher at an important university and find out my powers before contacting them so I know what I am selling. I started with the big names in higher education. Even if the individual researchers were not the top of their field, the institution's reputation and reach would offer me more protection if I could get them to accept me. Unfortunately, I knew enough about the villain scene in Earthbed Boston that I immediately wrote off Harvard and MIT. I just was not willing to put myself directly into Accord's hands. I had no reason to suspect he would care about me one way or the other. But if he did take an interest in me, there was little chance I would be able to get away from him. Yale was my next choice. I was happy to find that Dr. Charlotte Neckett, a top physicist, specialized in exploring the effects and properties of exotic energies created and controlled by some para-humans. I was not sure of my powers, but I knew they were energy-related. I had flown with some sort of Iron Man-esque repulsors. She looked like my best bet. Her publications were quoted frequently in the scientific literature for both physics and para-human studies. And Yale had one of the top 5 endowments, so they were a powerhouse not directly tied to a state government. An hour's research showed New Haven was not plagued with dangerous para-humans, a bonus for the plan. There was not even a PRT department there. On a personal note, I was somewhat familiar with the city and thought I could be comfortable living there. Not far from the library I found a homeless charity office and asked where I could find a thrift store to buy clothes. The woman at the office, a Mrs. Jellaby, drove me to the Salvation Army store, dropped me off, and gave me $20 to get me started. I thanked her as she left. Inside the store I found a bag and several sets of clothes my size. I even found a sports coat, along with some ties, I could afford. It was a lot easier finding clothes that fit this body than my older one. In the back of the store, I saw a section dedicated to cheap costumes. I assumed it was for Halloween and parties, but in this world, it could also be used for recently triggered capes. I added 3 different looking masks to my purchase, thinking if I only bought one it might be more easily recognized. I used my original world cash with no difficulty. When I was done, I changed into blue jeans, a red t-shirt, and a dark gray hoodie. On the way out I donated my extra-large outfit to the shop. After walking far enough to find another wooded area, I took off and headed south. I was wearing a black domino mask and had my hoodie up and pulled tight. I could feel something emanating from me that kept the wind from blowing in my eyes. 2 hours later I landed in Mt. Washington State Forest. Located where Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New York met, it was one of the more deserted places I knew of in the area. I found spot well away from the marked trails and started testing my powers. As a landed red energy washed out of my feet and palms. This pressed against the ground. I instinctively knew how to reduce the pressure to land. Pointing my hand towards a rock the size of my head, half buried in the soil, I released the same red energy but in a more concentrated beam. The rock shot away into the woods, disappearing among the trees. I tried the same thing with my other hand and a blue beam shot out. This time my target, another bowling ball-sized rock, shot towards me. I dived out of the way as it flew past, landing somewhere far behind me. I looked at my hands. Red beams pushed, blue beams pulled. I tried switching hands. It was easy to shoot either tractor, red, or pressor, blue, beams from either hand. I could even change the beam from pull to push or vice versa in midstream from a single hand, causing my target to reverse direction in mid-movement. Every effort I made to move an object in a direction other than directly away from me or towards me failed. This was not traditional telekinesis as depicted in all the stories, and given that it worked on all sorts of targets, it was not magnetism either. There were limits to how large an object I could move. Any boulder bigger than a car was too much. I did not know enough to measure the actual mass involved. If I used a tractor beam on something too big, I was pulled towards it. If I used a pressor beam, I was pushed away. That was the basis of my flight. Targeting small objects required less energy. I quickly learned that by using only a minute charge I could pull sticks and stones to my hand. The less energy used, the slower the object traveled and, more interestingly, the dimmer the energy stream. It was possible to affect objects with invisible beams, but they had to be light, or the movement would be very slow. I could even hover slowly without glowing red, which would make stealthy movement possible at night. There were many more things I wanted to know about this deceptively simple power. For instance, what would happen if I used a tractor beam on an object from one hand and a pressor beam on the same object from the other? But I wanted to get to New Haven before dark, so decided to cut my experimentation short. Taking off, I headed south to the coast and east to New Haven. I landed in East Rock Park and took a bus towards Yale. Dr. Neckett had a late afternoon class and I wanted to try to catch her while I knew where she was. "Excuse me, Dr. Neckett?" I asked. After landing, I had swapped my hoodie for a dark blue Oxford shirt and combed my hair as well as I could. I still needed a shave but looked more like a poor student than a homeless person. "Yes," she replied, turning to face me. Dr. Neckett was a tall African-American woman in her late 30s or early 40s. She wore her long, beaded locks pulled back in a low ponytail. Her outfit was professional and subdued, though her dark batik blouse showed a hint of personality which was reinforced by her piercing eyes, the focus of her attractive face. "I know it's late, but I wanted to set up a time to talk about your work on exotic energies produced by para-humans." I kept my posture non-threatening and put as much distance between us as I could while maintaining some privacy. The last students had just come out of her classroom, and some were still lingering in the hall. "I was hoping you might have a few minutes this evening for me to set the stage for later discussions." I was concerned that I would come out sounding like a gangster from a bad movie, especially as she had to have some security concerns when working with capes. I could easily see some thinker or gang boss wanting to use her research for their own ends. Still, I needed to catch her interest as quickly as possible. She looked at me consideringly for several seconds. I was not physically imposing, but that did not matter when dealing with potential capes. "You're not one of my students, are you?" "No, ma'am," I replied. She winced at the address. I knew it was not popular in New England. I had actually been taken to task by one provost for using it. But I was from Texas and had been indoctrinated at a young age. It sometimes just slipped out. "But I think you'll be interested in my proposal. At least I can offer you something to consider before any appointment we might set." "All right," she opened the classroom door. "Step in here. The students have all left so we can talk privately." She stepped back and motioned me into the room. I preceded her. She left the door ajar and made sure she had a free path to her exit. Once she was facing me, I slowly held my hand towards the whiteboard. Sending an invisible tractor beam, I pulled the eraser to me. She watched with interest as the item floated the dozen feet. "I'm a new cape with an academic background. I'm interested in working with you or for you in your research. I'm not a physicist, but I have written both published articles and successful grants. And, to put it bluntly, I need a job." I then activated my flight, trying to keep the red flare to a barely noticeable radiance. "And a place to stay, but that's not your problem. I see. She stopped and considered. I'm assuming you can do more. Yes, ma'am. I have tractor and presser beams capable of moving several tons, though I don't know the upper limit. I've just begun to explore my capabilities and would rather see it done scientifically. Why not go to the Protectorate? They do power testing, she asked. I'd rather study than play cops and robbers. I tried not to show too much contempt or cowardice, just offering a reasonable preference. I do work with the PRT on occasion. It's how I get access to most of my test subjects. I winced at the description. I'd rather be your research assistant than a guinea pig. But if that's where you need me to start, I'm willing. Can you come back tomorrow morning? Say 10 am, she asked. We can meet in my office, but I want to see you in the lab. Sure. Where's your office? I asked, taking out my phone to check I had gotten it right on the net. She looked at the phone oddly for a second, then answered. Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow. I found a homeless shelter that was willing to take me in for the night, so I did not risk using my Outworld cash or credit cards in a hotel. It was not a pleasant night, but it was better than sleeping outside. I was able to shower and shave before I put on different clothes, including the jacket and tie. This was a job interview after all. A bus took me back to campus and I was 15 minutes early for the meeting, a habit I picked up in the army that used to drive my wife crazy. Dr. Neckett was in her office, but I waited until just before 10 am to knock. You came, she said, sounding a little surprised. I was half expecting you to disappear. No, ma'am. I'm here and ready to work. Have you given any thought to how I might fit into your research? Do you have a CV? Something that will show me some of these articles and grants? She raised one eyebrow. I really hate to admit this, but all I have to my name in this world is what you see. I gestured with my bag in my hand. Even my ID is problematic. What do you mean? She asked, gesturing me to sit in a guest chair. May I close the door? I'd rather this not be widely disseminated yet. She hesitated again, then nodded. As I sat, she kept one hand under her desk. I knew from my experience it was always a risk to be alone in an office with a student, especially one of the opposite gender. Open doors protected everyone. But professors also had to be willing to be confidants when needed. I carefully laid out my driver's license, faculty ID, social security card, and one each of all the bills in my pocket. I also turned my phone on and set it on the desk next to the rest. She had looked at it funny the previous evening, so it might be an unknown brand or OS. She picked them up and looked at them one at a time. Your father? She asked. No. That was me 3 days ago. I went to sleep June 1, 2021 in Hartford and woke up yesterday in Brockton Bay, looking like this. And I now have a superpower, something that does not exist in my world. We have no capes, never have. Outside of fiction, that is. She looked at the bills and the phone, scrolling through the pictures in memory and opening the settings to find the system information. If these are fakes, they are consistent. Do you remember your life before you woke up yesterday? Yes. All of it. So not a case 53. She shrugged. We have known about alternate Earths for some time. There have been instances where individuals traveled between them. I'd say you are another such case. We can take some time to explore that. Does that mean I've got the job? I asked. Yes. I'm not exactly sure what the job is. And if I ever find out you've been lying to me, you're out immediately. Her eyes stabbed into mine. I almost jerked back. But, yes. I think we can help each other. May 5, 2011. James, Snagsby wants to meet with you. Charlie, as Dr. Neckett preferred to be called, leaned into my tiny office to inform me. I think he finally has approval of for your proposal. You think or you know? I asked. He sounded happy. That's usually a good thing, when your lawyer sounds happy. He's not my lawyer, I reminded her. He's a university counsel. What's good for Yale is not necessarily good for me. Go see him, she ordered. He said he'd be in his office until noon. Right. It was a beautiful day, perfect for a short walk across campus, passing beautiful Gothic buildings and ancient trees. I had been enjoying my new position. I used to joke that being a grad student with no money worries would be my ideal life. You get as much intellectual stimulation as the professors, possibly more, all without the pressures of committee work and politics. My new position was sort of like that. I had been a department chair at a previous university, with all the headaches that entailed. Working with Charlie both as a guinea pig and as an assistant was easier than being a chair by far, while keeping me in the environment I loved. I missed my old life, but thought this one had its advantages: youth, health, power. They were not to be sneezed at. Mr. Snagsby was a mid-50s white man that ate too much and exercised too little, though he looked comfortable with his life. He reminded me of my old self. Mr. Houghton, thanks for coming to see me so quickly. Dr. Neckett said you had word on my proposal. I replied, taking a seat. As you predicted, the PRT have begun pushing Yale to end your employment as your using your para-human abilities as part of your paid position is deemed a possible violation of NEPA 5. He paused and I nodded. I knew that was happening. I wanted to know what Yale was going to do. Dr. Tervedrop has decided that Dr. Neckett's work is too valuable to the university to allow the PRT to undermine it. Therefore, he is recommending to the provost and the president that your proposal be approved. So, it's not decided? I asked, not yet sure of Yale's administrative culture. The Center for Para-Human Studies falls under Dr. Tervedrop, so the provost and president are very likely to accept his recommendation, especially as the VP for Community Partnerships and Director of Communications both signed off in support. Grimsby smiled. I think you can consider this approved. Dr. Yarndis, the CPS director, will be the faculty lead on project. But you're likely to be the initial organizer of the Yale Corporate Hero Team. As a member of an officially registered team, you do not fall under the NEPA rules. Communications is still arguing if it will be Bulldog branded. Dr. Yarndis is already working up an ad to hire more capes. Can't have a team of one. Though until we do hire more, you're it. Great. I said with mixed emotions. I proposed the team concept to circumvent PRT attempts to use NEPA to move me away from Yale. But I had no desire to be a hero. Don't worry, Grimsby said. All the law mandates a hero team do is that the members occasionally patrol and that they are willing to liaise with local and national law enforcement. As you pointed out in the proposal, most corporate teams spend the majority of their time working for the benefit of their organization. For you and the others, when we hire them, it will mean continuing your work at CPS. Right, I said quietly to myself. Thanks for your help in this. I suppose Dr. Yarndis is my next stop. That's right. He stood and offered his hand. I shook it and left with a smile. Grimsby, name aside, was one of those genuinely nice people you occasionally came across. Oddly enough, Dr. John Yarndis was another such example. Possibly why the two got along so well. Yarndis was a professor of psychology who had begun researching the psychology of para-humans in the early 1990s. He had been the founding director of Yale's Center for Para-Human Studies and recruited a broad interdisciplinary group to be the center's fellows. Charlie was a physicist, but there were also economists, historians, biologists, and political scientists currently doing research as part of the center. Several were excited about the idea of regular access to one or more para-humans, Dr. Yarndis most of all. James. Congratulations. He was a short, slim man of middle years, with salt and pepper hair and a friendly, energetic demeanor. I had yet to meet anyone that did not like him. "Come in. I want to talk about how you see this team functioning. What are you interested in accomplishing beyond helping find us more regular research associates? While I'll support you in every way I can, I see this as your project, stemming from your vision. I'll admit, I saw this mostly as an expeditious way to circumvent the ridiculous, restrictive laws. I'm too new to town to know what needs there are that a small team of capes might be able to help address." We both pondered silently for a moment. "Did you know it's estimated that 1 in 5 para-humans in the US die each year? A disproportional number, more than half, of those are capes in their first year." The director shook his head sadly, then looked at me. "There are an average of 40 new triggers in the central Connecticut metro areas of New Haven, Waterbury, and Greater Hartford each year. Personally, I'd like to find a way to help those 40 kids, because they're mostly teenagers, beat those odds." "Isn't that what the wards and youth guard are for?" I asked, unhappy to present anything the PRT did in a positive light. "There are a lot of reasons the wards fail to help a lot of those kids. I can and have written papers on it." He smiled to take any sting out of his words. "The youth guard tries, but they're spread thin, concentrating on protecting the wards. I would love to see a para-human scouts or boys and girls club sort of organization that can offer these kids an opportunity to learn and interact with their peers in a safe environment mentored by adult para-humans. Perhaps your team could look into starting something like that locally." I had been a university educator for decades, but I got my start teaching middle school. Both my sons had been scouts and active in the youth center on post. I could easily see the value of a para-human youth center or club that was not dedicated to turning young capes into child soldiers but offered other challenges to help control their powers. Given what I knew about the drive to conflict inherent in the shards, I knew combat training would be essential to keeping the kids coming back. I had been involved in the Society for Creative Anachronism from an early age and experienced how intense mock combat could focus much of the aggression of youth. I had no idea if it would be enough to satisfy the needs of the shards. For whatever reason, I felt no obvious drive from whatever gave me my power. As good as the idea was, the looming destruction of the eastern seaboard and the death of half of humanity during gold morning was likely to make any progress I made on social causes in the next 2 years somewhat less important. I needed to see what I could do about saving the people I could. But first I had to deal with the issue before me. "I can see what you have in mind. It'll take resources to serve 3 of 4 dozen Cape kids at a time, certainly more than whatever team we build will be able to provide," I replied. "Is this something the Youth Guard might be able to help with, preferably without taking over?" "Possibly. I have several contacts in the organization, including at the headquarters in New York," Dr. Yarndis said. "Once you are a little more settled, and we have a few more members for the team, we can revisit this idea. For now, let's start working on a mission statement." June 28, 2011. "A lot of your predictions have proven accurate, including predicting the opening of the portal during the Echidna crisis," John said. He, Charlie, and I were meeting in the conference room in the temporary headquarters for my Yale-sponsored team, New Horizons. "But you're sure that it is important to join in the exploration of this new world?" "My visions have never been clear and are seldom filled with details. This one is even less so. I had started having visions shortly after my team proposal had been accepted in May. My first prediction was the arrival of Leviathan in Brockton Bay. I had also predicted the arrival of the Slaughterhouse 9 and the Echidna crisis. I tried to reserve my predictions for big events. It was all leading up to this prediction on the importance of moving to Earth Gimel. All I get are premonitions of significant future upheaval and opportunity tied to the opening of the portal. It's like my power is trying to force 100 predictions into one vision. I get an almost overpowering urge to get our people through that portal. Something dire is going to happen, something huge with far-reaching, possibly global impact. It won't be soon, maybe as much as 2 years out, but not much more than that. And it is important for lots of people to be on the other world? Sort of a lifeboat for humanity, or at least Earth-Bet's branch of it. Charlie queried. She was less sanguine about thinker predictions as they were harder to measure than energy interactions. But she knew they were a thing and that I had predicted right several times. I don't know, I said. Only that it's important that Yale take a lead on this. Isn't Boydhorn and his team working on designs for sustainable habitat models? This would be a great opportunity to try testing some in untouched territories. Think of the research possibilities. I knew Boydhorn was one of Yarndist's closest friends on the faculty. He would love the opportunity. John nodded. And Skimpole has that model for building a novel government structure with integrated human and para-human cooperation. This could be an opportunity to test that. I know that George and Rosa would be willing to work with me to protect the expeditions and building the habitats. If we could clear it with Youth Guard, it would be a great way to get our junior pathfinders, or whatever we end up calling them, out into the field and away from deleterious influences. All right. I see this is important to you, the director said. I also agree that several of the opportunities you've mentioned would be worth pursuing. I'll take it up the ladder, informally, and see what sort of resistance there's likely to be. You start writing up a proposal and see if there is any external money to support the effort. Yes, sir. June 23, 2013. There. Honoria Barbary pointed to the sky. High above us Scion appeared, streaking across the endless blue. Now! I yelled, shields now! Half a dozen people, including me, threw their hands towards the sky, or otherwise activated and guided their power. Several shields of energy and matter interwove to cover much of the New Haven settlement. A purple beam shot down from the crazed godling. It was not aimed at us, but at one of the other flyers buzzing around the Golden Man. He missed both his target and us. We were lucky. There was no way our combined shields could have held off even the lightest of Scion's attacks. But they could diminish the damage from the shockwave and debris thrown by the near miss. 2 of our geodesic domes were still crushed by boulders that got through or around the shield. The domes were empty. Most of our people were in the underground shelters Carstone had shaped with his geokinesis. Another beam, this one pulsing silver, hit the harbor, causing the water to steam and surge. Our boats were all pulled ashore, so there was less chance of them being sunk. The third attack was a horizontal lighting bolt that knocked 2 other flyers out of the air but came nowhere near us. Then Scion and his adversaries vanished. They could be back. We need to keep watch, I said. Ada and I will stand by, Carstone said. You check below. Let them know what happened. Good idea, I replied. Honoria came up beside me. She was one of Boydhorn's grad students who had taken over as project manager when he retired last year. We had become close over the months of hardship and solitude. Talk to Esther. She and Woodcourt are trying to keep peace down there, but Skimpole and Smallweed are giving them shit. I'll keep an eye up here. Her clairvoyance made her the best possible lookout, while letting her view the happenings in the shelter. All right, but call if you see anything. Everyone else rest up. The Haven Guardians were made up of more than a dozen para-humans we had recruited from New Horizons and the Youth Guard. I suspected, unless something drastic had changed, that Yale was gone. Several of my friends and colleagues were likely gone with it. I could not convince them all to cross over. But there were roughly 700 people in that shelter whose lives I had played a big part in saving. If we could just make it through the next few days and weeks, we would all have a real chance of surviving in this new world. The end. Thanks for watching.